Hi brothers and sisters. I thought we'd do a bit of a connect to our last video, and we're going to look at that cup of salvation that we took a quick look at in our last video, and connect it to some deeper thoughts that you know, maybe we can go down these pathways and take a look at. So in Psalm 116, this was the verse that we were looking at. What verse was it? Verse 15, was it? 13? Verse 13. I will take the cup of salvation, call upon the name of the Lord, and I will pay my vows unto the Lord now in the presence of all her people. So the cup of salvation here we identified as water, not as blood. God says, I require no blood of you. I never ever required a blood sacrifice of you. So salvation here is Hebrew number 344. That's a feminine noun, Yeshua, and it means deeds of deliverance, help, prosperity, save, saving, security, victory. And the reason why it's feminine is because she represents the water. Alright, she's always represented the water. Anybody who's done their study in the Old Testament will come to realize that the daughter of Zion, the daughter of Jerusalem, daughter Israel, the virgin daughter Israel, was the water of the world. She was to water the world with the word of God. And so she's the portion from above, and Job says that. He says, I made a covenant with mine eyes. Why then should I think upon a maid? For what portion of God is there from above? So when we understand the language and break down the meaning of those words, then we begin to get a grip on what the covenant of God actually was intended to look like. And this is going to pull in Joseph and his blessings. And actually Joseph should have been a feminine. The men of Baal, who took charge of the word, who belonged to her as the water, took it, stole it, drained it, repurposed it as a blood libation, whatever you want to call it, and basically wrote in here what they wanted written male. And one of the things that they wanted written male was the birthright, that belongs to man. Well, it doesn't, because it actually links us to what the Shulamite says. Look not upon me because I am black. The sun that shone upon her was the false light. Alright? And that false light came to be representative of the man's word. He took control of the word, told her what she was going to say, what she would teach her children. And that's why the Shulamite says what she says. But this links us actually to Joseph, alright? Because, okay, so let's just go through this quick in Psalm 116:13. This is the purpose of my notes, that I hopefully won't lose my trains of thought so easily. But she says, I will take the cup of salvation, right? And she says, I will fulfill my vows, which she means I will fulfill the spirit of my covenant, which has yet to be fulfilled upon this earth, because they rejected her in the very beginning, the spirit of her covenant, which was one of peace, love, truth, equity, represented by water and not blood. And so she says, I will fulfill my covenant unto the Lord, now in the presence of all her people, their mother's people. And she says, I believe it's either, I can't remember, it's either Isaiah 35, I think she says it in. It might be Psalm 50 or 55 that she says it in. I can't remember right off. And it may be Psalm 69 that she says it in. She says, I must restore that which I took not away. So it is the righteous spirit saying, I didn't take the children away. It was the harlot spirit that man exalted in his heart that took the children away from Mother God. And so she says, I will take the cup of salvation. I will take this pure word of God, the pure laws of heaven, because that's what we're talking about. And the laws of man imputed violence into those laws, which puts blood, and then it becomes an admixture of doctrine, blood and water on the table that you drink from, which is just pure pollution in God's eyes. You don't put a new patch on an old pair of pants. It just doesn't work. And it's the same, I know it's a little bit different, idea, but you don't add blood to a pure water, alright? Because once you do it, it pollutes the water, doesn't it? And so that's what that cup, that admixture, and you also see Moses having to part the Red Sea, which is this bitter water that we've spoke on. But she says, I will take this cup. And we know what's in the cup because it's identified salvation as 344, feminine noun. So it's representing the daughter's covenant back into existence as the pure water. And and it's Yeshua. They want to put it as small. Why? Because anything feminine is small and little next to the big man, you know. Why do you think they have so much trouble, you know, identifying with a female Messiah? Because they don't get to say he. They don't get to say he. They don't get to build themselves up by saying he every time they say he had to cleanse a she, the bride, which then they claim to be a part of as males. What? If that isn't twisted, I don't know what is, if you can't reason that out. But anyway, she speaks of the day of visitation. And we're going to hit on that maybe if I get the opportunity, if I'm not interrupted in some way. But she says again, I'll take that cup. I'll take the pure water in this cup. And she takes it, symbolizing that she is the water. All right? And that she will fulfill her vows by teaching man the law of her mother from above, which is God. She's God. You see, no such thing as female God. You see, it shows that they hated their sister from the very beginning. They did not want to teach her law and her spirit. And Mother says, you have failed to divide between the clean and the unclean. You have not done so. And that's identified, again, we've studied this over and over, Galatians 4, so I'm not going to speak upon it. But they divided the pleasant land into two covenants. One that played man's harlot and became yoked under his religious lies, and which is what's currently, you know, filling the world today in these women who walk and build up their brothers and egg them on to take her out because she's lying. They're really playing this harlot. That's what they're doing. They don't even know it. They're bringing themselves down. And, you know, it factors into the way we become shaped as people on this earth. And it goes back many hundreds and hundreds of years to this constant gnashing on woman that she is to blame for everything, the constant yoking of her under a man-made religious law and law. And after a while they become to the point where they hate one another and they will not support one another. They will not weave together as the truth and hold together in that truth like men will do. The men that have weaved together have been built up. They've built themselves up that they're the God image. She's not. We've got to, you know, get that woman in line. And the women come to the point after, of course, going through so much suppression, oppression, and violence over so many years, over hundreds of years, thousands of years, that it almost becomes ingrained right within us that we just are taught not to trust one another. We just can't hold together on nothing. And they'll try to say, well, it's this reason, it's that reason. It's for no other reason than he gnashed on her. He's gnashed on us. He's blamed us. He's pointed at us. He's treated us as less. He's yoked us under the law. He's taught a man-made religious lie that she's to blame for it all. He cleans her. And this gets ingrained in us. It really does, in our mentality and in everything that we do in life. And that's why it says that with these particular group of daughters that God calls out at the end, and calls her remnant daughters of Israel, she says they wear it like a yoke. They wear it, it just comes to I can't remember, it really restrains it. It really restricts us. And they bear it like a real yoke on them. So, but it tells us why we can't hold together. We've been taught not to hold together. Because they have gnashed and gnashed and gnashed upon us and taught us things about us that they had no right to teach us about us. We are made in our mother's image. We're not made in his image. We're not made in the Father's image. We are made in our mother's image. She ought to be the one teaching us about us, not him, no man. And yet that's precisely what we have to fall back on in our history. His teaching about us. That's what we have. Well, do you think he had anything nice to say? No, not according to this. So she says, I'll take this cup of salvation and I will fulfill my vows before the presence of all her people. And they're going to be her people because she's going to be teaching the spirit of the covenant that was supposed to be taught in the beginning. And as such, it means they're her vineyards. So she says, I'll call her out of the wilderness and I'll give her back her vineyards. Which is in refute to what it says of the Shulamite in Song of Songs 1:6. Look not upon me because I am black, because the lion theology shone upon me. Darkened my spirit, I began to teach his religious lies. And as such, the children became his and not mine. And mine became neglected. My children, that should have been full of my truth and my spirit, the spirit of my covenant, became neglected. Because I began to hearken to his lies. And so, who's speaking? Right? Who's speaking in Psalm 116? Who's taking the cup of salvation and fulfilling her vows? Well, you'll say it's a man. And our first thought, it's blood in the cup. It's not, once we get studying it. Who's speaking? It's identified in verse 16 of Psalm 116. O Lord, truly I am thy servant. All right. Well, who's identified as the servant in Scripture? Israel is. And that's a feminine, not a masculine. I am thy servant. And actually, I think it should be rendered this. You'll all say, oh, she's just twisting and doing that. No, I'm not. They did that. They twisted our word. They took our word from us. And they twisted it to render what they wanted it to render. So it tickled their ears so they could go, he, or he, and feel superior and make her feel this big. Well, you know, you look at those ads that they got Satan. He's painted red. You could tell he's built up with clay. It says he built himself up with thick clay under the lies. That's what he did. He empowers himself. He has horns. He's painted red. So he's making himself look like a bullock, number one. He's making himself look like a victim. He's red. And standing next to him is the other half of his covenant, a scantily clad woman, which is representative of the harlot spirit that hearkens to him and his words, which we identified who Satan is representing. Adam, the accuser, who accused her in the beginning and did not want the spirit of her covenant or her laws. And we see that with Joseph and his brothers, because Joseph is actually the birthright holder, which is feminine, not masculine. Again, they rewrote this. Anybody that can't reason that the birthright holder belongs to the feminine, and the divine feminine at that, not a man, you're not reasoning very well. I can tell you that. But it tells us who's speaking. And taking the cup of salvation in Psalm 116, O Lord, truly I am thy servant, and the daughter of Israel, who, or which is thou, has loosed my bonds. So thou, which is Jerusalem from above, Mother God from above, has loosed my bonds. I am her child. I am her daughter. I am cut from her. And we'll get into some of those scriptures in a minute. So when it says thou has loosed my bonds, it means she has removed the man-made religious lies off of my neck. That's why I can take the cup of salvation now, the cup of pure water without mixture of blood added into it, a blood sacrifice, because God says I require no blood of you. So in the servant, and I can't get into it because I'm going to run out of time, is identified in Isaiah 42 verse 3. And it says, Thou art my servant, O Israel, in whom I will be glorified. And Israel is identified as a feminine, not a masculine. They want to put Israel as he, Israel, she. And anyway, so we see the servant identified here. It is Israel. And she says, Behold my servant, whom I uphold, mine elect. The elect would be the choice one of her mother. Song of Songs 6:9. So we'll go through these quick. In my soul I delighteth. I have put my spirit upon her. Right? She shall bring forth judgment to the Gentiles. So who does this? Who's identified as the judge in scriptures? Well, read Micah 4:1-13 and you'll understand a little bit more. And so let's go to another part where we find the cup. This cup again. But we're going to have to backtrack to do that. So we're going to go from Psalm 116, where we have her taking the cup of salvation, which is identified as a feminine. Genesis 44, verse 5, what does it say? Is this not the cup my master drinks from and uses for divination? What you have done is wicked. So what is this concerning? Well, this was about Joseph's silver cup that he supposedly divined out of. And as a ruse, we'll use that term, it's not fitting. It wasn't a ruse, it was actually to draw the brothers back to him. Joseph gets one of his servants to put his silver cup in Benjamin's possessions. And then he sends his servants out after and says, we must search your bags because my master's cup has been stolen. Joseph's cup's been stolen. So, of course, they know they're going to find it in Benjamin's, backpack, to which they do. And then they're hauled back to Joseph, right? They're hauled back in front of Joseph, to which he accuses them and says, you took my silver cup. Anyway, there's a lot revolving around this because, of course, he says, I divined your guilt. Well, he didn't divine the guilt, number one. He already knew what their guilt was because he was there. He was the one they perpetuated it against. So the Spirit already is allegorical here in a sense, in that Joseph was there and saw it and knew it. He was the one that they perpetuated the crime against. So he did not have to have this silver cup to divine anything out of. But the word that they do give here for divination, so is this not the cup which my master, Joseph, drinks from, uses for divination? What you have done is wicked. So number one, they accuse them of being wicked for taking this cup that he divines from, when according to the Torah law, it is absolutely not permitted. And yet Joseph divined. But we know that he didn't in this instance. We already know that he knew the truth because he was there when it took place, because he was the one that they perpetuated this crime against. So we can dismiss it in that count, right? But Hebrew 5:172, it means to practice enchantments, divination, observe signs, and interpret omens. Now when you scroll down into the notes, it's going to say, and I did write it down, just let me locate it. By means of cup, and Joseph's cup was silver, again representing water. By hydromancy, is this what this method is known as? With implied power to learn secret things. Of course, we know Joseph didn't divine this truth because he was there. We know it happened to him personally. But yet, this is implied in the scriptures that Joseph, as the birthright holder, really representing the divine feminine that was rejected, does have to do with the water and the word of God, because of the verse that you find in Genesis 37:24. And what does it say? And they took him, and we can say her, because it was against the divine feminine that they were having problems with. So if you look at Genesis and you look at Joseph as the feminine aspect as opposed to the masculine that I believe the men of Baal changed around greatly, there's no telling how great they changed the truth around. We can only get it in our allegorical terminology, in our allegorical sense. In Proverbs 9, she does say, I have set my table and I have been forced to mingle. I have been forced to mingle my words in the admixture. So she's saying my truth is in there. It flows like a silver thread, all right? And it is there to be found. But Genesis 37:24, there's no denying that Joseph links to the water in the well, which you find Proverbs 5, you are to receive your water, which means the word of heaven, which is the spirit representation here upon earth, the woman, from your own wife in Proverbs 5, which represents the water in the well. And we also get her as a fountain sealed, which flows from Lebanon, which is the north kingdom, in Song of Songs 4, verses 12 to 15, if you want to go in and read that. But here, there's no denying. Genesis 37:24, and they took him, Joseph, which represents the birthright holder, who was going to rule over them. Remember, he was going to rule. Remember the dream they hated him for. And threw him, actually it should be her, into the cistern, into the well. And the cistern was empty. There was no water in it. So there's no denying that the character of Joseph, which actually should be representing the divine feminine, and it should be female here, is representing the cup and the water. Absolutely. Which is why Joseph, ironically, is pictured with a silver cup. And that it was stated that he was using hydromancy, is what it says, is the way that he divined. So he was using water. And then he's thrown into a cistern, a well, without water. Now the interesting thing here is Reuben, who was the initial birthright holder. So again, I question whether Reuben shouldn't have been representing a feminine, actually stood up for Joseph and saved his life. He said, don't kill him. Whatever you do, don't kill him. Just do something else, but don't kill him. And I don't know if I got that passage pulled up. Let me just check here right quickly. I did have it pulled up. Okay, there it is. So what does it say of Reuben, who was the first birthright holder? It got took from him. Actually, as the firstborn, the blessing and the birthright both should have went to him. As it was, because of his sin, it got split. One went to Judah and the other to Joseph. All right, is what we're told. Now, I don't know. Anyway, this is what it says. They say, come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. We can say that a vicious animal has devoured him. Then we will see what becomes of his dreams. You see why they hated him? Because he had already prognosticated, I can't remember the word, and told them of his dreams that he was going to rule over them. And they couldn't stand him for it. So you see the divine feminine here being cast down, actually, is what you're seeing. And like I said, we don't know to what extent those wicked men has twisted the words and removed the divine feminine, but we do know he hated her. He did not want her rule. He did not. And Joseph is the allegory to that divine feminine that was being cast off by the men. All right? So, but what did Reuben do? Reuben was an exception, as we're told Judah was as well. I don't know how deep we can get into that, but we're still looking into it. But come now, let us kill him and throw him in. And then in 21, when Reuben heard this, he tried to rescue Joseph from their hands. Let us not take his life, he said. Verse 22, do not shed his blood. So we see a blood libation here actually being denied the first time around of the divine feminine. They wanted to murder her then and get rid of her then from being their ruler, which had been told to her in a dream, and they didn't want to hear it, though they got him here. It's really representing the divine feminine, the birthright holder. We know what a birthright is. We've studied it. We've looked at it. And so they didn't want her. I lost my train of thought. Do not shed his blood. So we see the blood libation actually following through in Lamentations 4:1, when the sons of God, or the sons of Zion, began to murder the precious stones, which is identified as the holy ones of Israel, on the corners. And they began to offer up a blood libation to a blood god, is your idea. So, do not shed his blood. Throw him into this pit in the wilderness, and do not lay a hand on him. Reuben said this, so that he could rescue Joseph from their hands and return him to his father. I think return her to her mother. And so we see this allegory all playing out in terminology that they want to deny is a divine feminine. So when we do go and we look up the word cistern here that they tossed Joseph into, it does say it's a male. So you may have the image of a well, the outer parts being male with the inner part being female. But then on earth we see the covenant of two bodies, two spirits in a sense. So she takes of his body in a sense, though she is tabernacling in a different body, and he takes of her spirit, though his spirit is yet different than hers. So it's a covenant of body and spirit. He typically represents the body, she typically the spirit, though you see two and two in a sense, all right, representing the Godhead that they all want to say is he. You call God a liar every time you do it, and you bring on your own judgment, and it's happening now in part, and you're still denying wisdom when she calls to you. You're saying there's no wisdom found in her words. God's he, or God's he, and he birthed and he created, and yet you call God the liar who says you are without excuse not to understand the Godhead. I manifested it in this creation for your eyes to bear witness to. One male, one female. Where do you see three males? And when we spoke, the Godhead spoke. It was not he. All right? And when man tells the tale, he makes woman the harlot in that she comes down. But in the truth of it all, she's the last thing created, representing the glory and the spirit that governs the entire kingdom and is the water. And here you see her as the birthright holder, Joseph representing her getting tossed into the well, who the brother said, she ain't going to rule over us. So you see all those allegories that everybody wants to say, don't make no sense. Makes more sense that man gives life to all things. Of course it does, because he wants to say he, and build himself up as a supernatural creature, just as you see Satan built up with clay in those ads with his little harlot standing next to him, fawning over him, and him appearing as this very supernatural being, which actually links back to your husband Adam as the accuser. We did a video on a series of words, how they all interconnect. Satan, Baal, Beelzebub, devil, accuser. They all link back to Adam. All right? Now, where are we going to go from here? So the cistern here also that Joseph gets dumped into had me thinking of another passage, which again we find in. Now, did I write it down? I didn't write it down. So that means I have it pulled up. Okay, I don't have it pulled up. And that's okay, because we'll get it pulled up. So Isaiah 51. This is where this cistern led me to. What does it say? Hearken to me, ye that follow after righteousness, ye that seek the Lord, look unto the rock. We know who the rock of Israel was. We've identified that rock as your shepherdess, who comes from Joseph's blessings in Genesis 49. Go look up Joseph's blessings. From thence is, it says, the shepherd, the rock of Israel. Well, that rock is identified in Deuteronomy 32. You forgot the rock that birthed you and writhed in pain to bring you forth. There's no way you're getting dad out of that one. You're going to have to come away with it's a mother and her water. And when Moses struck that stone the second time, when he was to speak kindly to her, it was symbolizing exactly what the men of Israel was going to do, which was going to strike her and cast her down. And that's just what the men have done of this world. They have not hearkened to the spirit of their original covenant, which was her laws of peace, truth, equity. Violence should have never been on this earth. And yet, that's the prevailing way of mankind. Violence and muscle and proof. See, I'm God. Look at us. You need us to defend you in war. War was never part of God's way. Never. That got wrote into the law. So, what exactly was Joseph's dreams? What exactly was Joseph's dreams? Well, Joseph's dreams was Genesis 37, 5-8. Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, we could say she, they hated him all the more. Listen to the dream I had, he says. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field, when suddenly my sheaf rose up and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it. His brother said to him, do you intend to reign over us? Well, that was the purpose of the woman. As the last thing created, she is the firstborn of the kingdom, representing the Holy Spirit on this earth, the Holy One of Israel. And though they tore her down the first time, she is promised full restoration, not only in the Genesis 15:9 covenant, but also in passages where Mother says, I will build you again, O Virgin Israel. I will build you up once again. And that's why you see her in Psalm 116 taking the cup of salvation, identified as feminine, which makes it the water. And she says, now will I restore, and I will fulfill my vows. I will fulfill my covenant. And I will lead the children back home. I will do that by splitting the waters, these bitter waters. They came to rule over us. And so they say to him, do you intend to rule over us? Will you actually rule us? And they hated him, her, all the more because of his dream and what he had to say. Well, it was actually her. The woman, she was to rule over them. Now, we have evidence. Anybody wants to get into real study, what we call real study of the word, and not the pretend study wherein you go and study the theology that they already shoved down your throat. That's not really studying. Studying means to go in and to put the pieces and the words together as the Holy Spirit would lead you to do, not as man would. He's not your Holy Spirit. He's your Baal, trying to play God on earth. Baal is another word for your husband, who accused and shot at those branches as they passed through the breaches in David's wall, which is found in Joseph's blessings again. And the archers that shot at them branches, those daughters of Zion, with the word, that was their covenant, is identified as Baal, your husband, B-A-A-L, 1167. And but Joseph's coat of many colors identifies this as her birthright. The birthright is represented as a variegated robe. And the bride, who is one, when she is brought to the second Adam, in Psalm 45, is dressed in a variegated robe, or coloring, which is identifying her as the Holy One. That's what is actually identifying her as. And so, you know, in Jeremiah 23, and all of these passages connect. Isaiah 1:22. Now, in Isaiah 1:22, they want to shift the actual meaning around here. And I'll pull that up in a minute. Where is it? There it is. So Isaiah 1, if we read through this, again, we get this understanding over and over that she required no blood sacrifice, which is also going to lead us to another passage, Psalm 16. We'll go there in a minute. To what purpose is the multitude of your sacrifices unto me, saith the Lord? I am full of burnt offerings of ram and the fat of fed beasts, and I delight not in the blood of bullocks, or of lambs, or of the goats. I never did. When you came to appear before me, who hath required this at your hand to tread my courts? Bring no more vain oblations. Incense is an abomination unto me. The new moons and the Sabbath, the calling of assemblies, I cannot away with it. It is iniquity, even the solemn meeting. Your new moons and your appointed feasts my soul hateth. They are trouble unto me. I am weary to bear them. And when ye spread forth your hands, I will hide mine eyes from you. And when ye make many prayers, I will not hear. Your hands are full of blood. You don't get what a blood libation is, do you? It's the sacrificing of a man saying that God required blood to forgive you. God never required blood of you, ever. And God says, I will wash the blood off of the daughters of Zion. And it's a symbol of a mark of oppression, but in the beginning it's a mark of shame. It becomes a mark of shame. This red marking, in a sense, is a symbol of shame, meaning that she turned to man's covenant and began to teach his lies. But she says, I'll wash that blood off of you. And that red color will then become a symbol of your suffering and what you went through to restore the children back. So you have it negative on one hand, you have it very positive on another hand. So she says, you will not remember the times of your youth, right? I forget how it's stated. And she says, though you turned and you played into that covenant, you played as harlot, you went under him, and you fell for it, in the end, it's going to be a symbol of the suffering that you went through to restore the children back to me under your original covenant. And so she says, and when you spread forth, I will not hear, your hands are full of blood. Wash you, make you clean, and put away the evil of your doings from before mine eyes. Cease to do evil, learn to do well, seek judgment, relieve the oppressed, judge the fatherless, the motherless, plead for the widows or the widowers. We are currently considered motherless in the heavens because we rejected the spirit of our covenant, who was Mother Jerusalem from above. So we have become motherless. When they cast Joseph in the well, we see all that symbology. I don't know how anybody can say we're not seeing that symbology, especially when you are to get your waters from your wife, representing the spirit of the covenant, which she's identified as such in Malachi 2, as the spirit of the covenant that was rejected. So, but if you refuse and rebel, ye shall be devoured with the sword, with the word, for the mouth of the Lord has spoken it. Now, in verse 22 here, I have problems because it's the silver identified as the water. And they want to put the wine as what you're to listen to. No, that's the admixture. They've got it all screwed up here. It don't even make sense in the rendering. And there's another chapter that I came across, an offering of red wine. And when you go in and you look the word red wine, it's not even there. It's just like they just plopped it down out of the blue. It shocked me that they were so, out there with it. For anybody who wanted to pull the word up, red wine is not there. It's not even in the context at all. It was ridiculous. But anyway, I might be able to find it and pin it underneath. I might have to go through my history and see. But what does it say in Isaiah 1 verse 22? Thy silver is become dross, thy wine mixed with water. Do you not see how that's twisted? Thy silver is become dross, thy water is mixed with wine. That wine was representing blood. So you began to write violence and hatred and wicked things into my pure word, water, silver, which you were to get from your wife, which is identified in Proverbs 5 and Isaiah and Song of Songs 4, and I'm sure other places too. But those are two references that I mostly give, not saying they're not there. So in Psalm 16, David also says this of the cup. So, oh, right, I was going to Psalm 51. Did I go to Psalm 51 even? Or did I forget it? Not Psalm 51. Sorry, Isaiah 51. I often will say Isaiah for Psalm or Psalm for Isaiah, so forgive me for that. Sometimes I'll mix names up. Hopefully those who's watched me long enough, you'll know that I often will do that. But Isaiah 51:1, listen to me, you who pursue righteousness, who seek the Lord, look to the rock from whence you were cut. What rock are we cut from? Our shepherdess, who was Israel in the beginning. That's Joseph's blessings in Isaiah 49. From whence is your shepherdess? The stone of Israel. The stone of Israel is she says, I chose you in Deuteronomy 32 as my peculiar people. And then you forgot me. You forgot every word about me, about the one who birthed you and writhed in pain to bring you forth. You forgot about me. And she's identified as the stone. You forgot about the rock. With her word. You forgot about her. And so that's why it says, look to the rock. And it's talking to her daughters reborn upon the earth that you see reborn out of the dust of the earth, so we're quarried in a sense. Look to the rock from which you were cut, our mother, which is the original foundation that we're to be cut from, and to the quarry, which is actually the well, cistern. It's the same word here that they dumped Joseph into, from which you were hewn. So it's saying, you who actually pursue truth, who pursue righteousness, as opposed to listening to man-made lies, who wants to exalt himself, and you harlots who's right with him doing it because you're too lazy or just too stubborn to go in and reason the truth out. You think that makes truth? You think that makes sense, does it? What he's teaching you? Well, then I guess God's sense is totally different than yours. Totally. So it says, look to the well from which you were hewn from. So that takes you back to your wife, the spirit, the spouse of his covenant, in Song of Songs 4:12. My spouse is a fountain, a spring shut up. All right? So they shut her up, number one. You can look at it that way. But there's a set time that she's going to be abounding forth with the words of truth. And God says, you will see my glory manifested once again upon this earth, and you will not be able to deny the truth. So that word there, from which you are hewn from, is well. So it's speaking to her daughters, to the reborn Israel upon the earth, that you see Isaiah 29:4. She will be rebirthed out of the dust of the earth. Here she's cut from her mother with the word water. And she's the fountain sealed in Song of Songs. So when you go and you study all of these, it's just incredible what you're going to learn. Incredible. About the divine feminine, as opposed to the divine he, that gives life to all things, and he's the spirit, and he's the temple, and he's the word, and he's God, and he had to clean her. You think that little, pronoun? A he? Is that a pronoun? You think that pronoun don't just build them up? Oh, they can't take that he off their tongue. They love it too much. It builds them up. And you know what it does? It empowers them. It empowers them to be something they are not, which is greatly built up and over you. And you wonder what's wrong with women. They have tore her down so low. It's even a wonder, and it is a great wonder, that these women can even pick their heads up and go in and study and look for the truth. It's a great wonder that they have any ability whatsoever after they have gnashed at them with their teeth like lions upon that great lioness in Ezekiel 19 to tear her down and to yoke her under their man-made lie so they can play God over her. And it don't make sense. No, it don't make sense because you refuse to go in and look at the words. You play stupid. You say, well, I can't do it. I don't know how to do it. I didn't either. I'd have gave you that same excuse 15 years ago. I was too dumb to know anything. I was too dumb. So, Psalm 16 is where we're heading to now. Right here. So, when we look at that word cut out, right? She's cut out of her mother. And we know it's her, and it's specifically her, because if you read Isaiah 51, I've got to make sure I'm saying the right passage. Isaiah 51, and then you follow up, and you go to Isaiah 52, it's clearly she, the daughter of Zion, that she says, you who have been a captive, pick your head up, shake the dust off. You see, we've got her shaking the dust off because she's just been quarried from her mother of the original foundation, and she's now holding no guile of the Babylonian harlot spirit that teaches man as God. She's now stood up and she becomes enthroned now. She takes her place on her throne, and it is her throne. And she says to the harlot Babylon in Isaiah 47, come down, there is no throne for you. And she says to the men in Malachi chapter 2, yet is she the spirit of this covenant, not the harlot that you want, so you can write your own laws and subjugate her and teach her as less and gnash at her and tear her down and make her play your harlot and then point at her when she does exactly what you want her to do. You love to do that because that gives you this ability to look more righteous than what you really are and play God. And you get all of that. You get all that understanding. So here we've got the word miktam in Psalm 16 verse 1. A miktam of David, preserve me, O God, for in thee do I put my trust. So this is David speaking about the spirit of his covenant, really, is what he's speaking of. And when you look up the word miktam, it's actually derived from another word which means engraved. And that engraving means that we become marked. Alright? Marked. We're marked with the true spirit of Mother God's covenant. In the beginning was Israel that gets cast down, rejected. Joseph represented the north kingdom, Israel. And then his son Ephraim, the north kingdom, came to be known as Ephraim. And so you see that twofold blessing playing out through Joseph again, which is promised for these daughters, a double blessing. Just as she was the beginning, she will also be the end. She's cut from her mother, the original foundation. She stands up holding no guile as the first fruits in the earth. And what it means to be Israel, it means that you are now holding her theology. You understand what her truth was, what her covenant was, why she stood upon this earth and was in covenant with man. And man hated her, rejected her, tore her down. And we see that all played out through Joseph. And so miktam means engraved. So she becomes engraved. What might she become engraved with? Well, she becomes known as Israel, doesn't she? So she actually becomes engraved with the name Israel. Or the daughter Zion. These daughters, these 144,000 that are seen as a flock of she-goats shepherded by the Shulamite in Song of Songs. And it says, return, return, O Shulamite. What might we see when the Shulamite returned? As it were, the company of two armies. Well, two armies is identified, one army. Christ identifies as 72,000. And so if she's got the company of two armies, which is also identified as the camp of Mahanaim, God's camp, which we see Jacob wrestling with. And the name Israel means God wrestles, which is from the name Sarah and El. They don't want to say it's a name Sarah, but yeah. And so she's the queen of the kingdom. It was the spirit of her covenant. And so they have this name Israel, they have the name Zion, they have the name Jerusalem. So you're engraved with that by speaking her truth, by speaking her theology, by having her spirit on your tongue. And so this is the first fruits, reborn out of the dust of the earth. They're queried from their mother. They're holding the truth. So the first fruits are identified as female in the scriptures for anybody who wants to look. Virgin never applies to male. Virgins have always applied to the female all through Old Testament. Virgin does not apply to male, not once. It applies to females every time. And in the New Testament, they managed to slip that in there 1 or 2 counts. A virgin applies to a male. No, it doesn't. It has never applied to a male. It has always applied to a female. Under their own theology. So, anyway, there it is. And then she's identified as being the heifer in the Genesis 15:9 covenant, known as the Abrahamic covenant. So the heifer, the red heifer, she sacrificed, and the blood has to be washed off these daughters of Zion as a symbol of the shame, playing his harlot, teaching his religious lie and theology. In the end, it becomes a symbol of her suffering and what she went through to actually restore the children back to mother in the end under the truth of the covenant, is what it looks like. And so they're marked in this way. And then, like I said, that word engraving tends to lead you to the word stain, which is very negative. So we become stained in blood. We know blood does not wash you clean. Blood is a symbol of violence in the lying covenant, which Joseph testifies to. So, a miktam of David, O my soul, thou hast said unto the Lord, thou art my Lord. So, David is actually saying here, the Lord is 136. So he's identifying the spirit that he's in love with. And she is not only identified as the Lord here, 136, but she is also identified as 3068, the Lord. So he says, O my soul, thou hast said unto the Lord, thou art my Lord. The daughter Zion, you are the spirit of my covenant. He's in love with her. He's not in love with a man. He's in love with her, which is what men are supposed to be in love with. Too bad they're in love with themselves and the he, or the he, and look at us, and look at me. And that's what it's always been about with them. Ego. They're on an ego trip. They get on the pulpit. They try to downplay it, but it's there. It's there. That he is always there. You read your calendar page every day. It's like a contest between them. Okay, how many times can you slip the word he in there? How many times? And it just becomes a constant brainwashing, is really what it is. Just a method of brainwashing. Thou art my Lord, my goodness extends not to thee, but to the saints that are in the earth, and to the excellent, in whom is all my delight. So he's saying the holy ones that are holding the covenant of your spirit, great God Almighty, great daughter Zion, who is the other half of my covenant, who I dearly love. He says, in these holy people I delight in them. They are the noble ones upon the earth. And then what does he say? Their sorrows shall be multiplied, that hasten after another God. And their drink offerings of blood will I not offer, nor take up their names into my lips. So he's speaking of a cup offering here, but this cup has blood in it. And what do we take of, or what did I used to take of, I don't take of it anymore, was a cup of wine that sat on the table representing the blood of a man who died to cleanse his wicked wife, who was found to be guilty. You see how it builds him up? Oh no, that don't build him up. No, it just debases her. That's all it does. Yeah, so she's this big in the earth. And he's this big, he's this giant, he's this supernatural creature. He's got these supernatural element. He's God, man, on earth. And she's just nothing but his little servant. That's all. And so it says, David says, I won't take up their name, their blood offerings, in a cup that they drink. Their drink offering of blood. And you don't see the correlation to the admixture of doctrine in the cup on the table, wherein you worship a false god, he, or he, and then testify against God's very creation, which God says you are without excuse not to understand the Godhead. I manifested it in the things that I created, one male, one female. And the female is the last thing created, is representing the Holy One over the earth, over the dominion, which is identified again in Micah chapter 4 or 5. The first dominion will be restored back to her spirit, her. And so the Lord, and he says this in verse 5, the Lord is the portion of mine inheritance and of my cup. So he's saying he takes of her cup. Thou maintainest my lot. He says the lines are fallen unto me in pleasant places. Where's that pleasant place? Israel. Israel was known as the pleasant land. And what was the controversy of Zion about, which is about the day of the Lord? Well, the controversy of Zion was about the splitting of the pleasant land. And the splitting of the pleasant land was about splitting the daughter of Zion into two covenants. One into a harlot that would teach his religious lies and laws and build him up as God. You see Satan built up as red in this bull who suffered. That's why he's red. And with the harlot on his arm, really it's fallen Adam in covenant with the harlot that builds him up. That's what most of you are today. And but he says it pleasant places. And God says you have failed to divide between the clean and the unclean. You better learn to divide, or else the controversy of Zion, the day of the Lord, is going to come upon you as the visitation that you're not looking for. And I believe it's already begun just based on what is said in Jeremiah 23. So he takes of her cup, and her cup is a cup of pure water. There's no violence imputed into her cup. It's pure water that she drinks from. And it comes directly from heaven, known as the living waters of Lebanon. Yeah, sorry I'm doing this. Anyway, so he takes from her cup. So you actually end up seeing two vessels holding water, which is actually the covenant that you see present today on earth. And though he largely defines the temple, she largely defines the spirit, together you see them in union. So he's the body, she's the spirit. She partakes of his body, he partakes of her spirit. And you see this covenant fulfilled. They don't want us in covenant because they don't want the righteous daughters, and we have to emphasize the word righteous, making the laws of earth. They want to be able to build themselves up. They don't want to listen to their righteous spirit, the righteous daughter, though God states she is the wife of your covenant. She's the spirit of your covenant. And if you expect to live, then you're going to have to hearken to her. And baby, they don't want to do that. Now watch what Jeremiah 23 says. God says, when I call and you didn't answer, that's actually wisdom calling. Wisdom calls in Proverbs chapter 1, and they don't answer. They don't hearken. They don't listen, because it just simply ain't adding up. One male, one female, one body, one spirit, covenant. No, that don't make sense. He that gives life, and he that had to die to cleanse her because she was so filthy, such a sinner, Yeah, that makes more sense. That blood washes us and water don't. Yeah, that makes. Oh, well, there you go with that. But Proverbs, wisdom speaks. Proverbs 1. She says, "When I called, you didn't answer. You go about with your foolish thinking," she says, "and I'm gonna laugh when your calamity comes." And you see that calamity as the rod of iron in Psalm 2. And she says, I'm going to mock and I'm going to laugh at you just like you did to me. You mocked and you laughed at my reasoning. You said it didn't make no sense. This is wisdom speaking, and she says it all in Proverbs 1. And then I laid my table. I was forced to set my table. And she says, I cut out my 7 pillars. I send my maidens forth with my words of truth to the foolish that might turn and listen to my wise words. And then she says in Proverbs 1, but you didn't hearken to me when I come. And in Psalm 2, then she says, I'm going to send a rod of iron, and I'm going to laugh in the day of your visitation. Which takes us to Jeremiah 23 and those foolish dreamers that began to hearken to Baal, which means a son listening to the father's teachings. Balaam, who told Balak to go get the women, send them in, teach them another law, which came from Adam, the Adamic nations that surrounded the woman seed known as Israel. We saw Balak become absolutely terrified because she began to grow in such she was so numerous. They were terrified of her, of this mighty nation. And I'm going to be interrupted. But I would recommend you go in and you look at the day of visitation. Their ways are still slippery and they're still in darkness because they have failed to hearken to wisdom. So I thank you for watching my video, and I hope you're blessed with a wonderful day. Thanks.